There is a particular kind of moment that passes almost without notice. A wife glances up from her book and says, "Look at that gorgeous sunset." A husband, absorbed in the newspaper, either lowers it and looks, or grunts and keeps reading. It lasts 3 seconds. It seems to mean nothing. And in The Relationship Cure, the psychologist John Gottman argues that this 3-second moment, repeated thousands of times across the life of a relationship, is the single most reliable predictor of whether that relationship will thrive or quietly fall apart. This is a summary of The Relationship Cure, a 5-step guide to strengthening your marriage, family, and friendships, written by John Gottman with Joan DeClaire and published in 2001. Gottman is not a self-help guru trading in slogans. He is a research scientist who spent decades observing real couples, families, and co-workers inside an apartment-style laboratory wired with cameras and heart rate sensors, watching how people actually behave when they think the stakes are low. What he found overturns the usual advice about grand romantic gestures and dramatic communication breakthroughs. The health of our closest bonds, he discovered, is built not in the big moments, but in the smallest ones. And the good news is that the skills involved can be learned by anyone willing to pay attention. What follows walks through the book's argument as Gottman builds it. From the discovery of the tiny unit of connection he calls the bid, through the emotional systems and inherited habits that shape how we bid, to the concrete skills and shared meaning that hold relationships together over a lifetime. Chapter 1. How we connect emotionally. Gottman opens by naming the discovery that organizes the entire book. Beneath every relationship, he argues, lies a single fundamental unit of emotional connection, which he calls the bid. A bid is any attempt, a question, a gesture, a touch, a look, a sigh, that says, in effect, "I want to feel connected to you." Bids are usually small and easy to miss: a request to pass the ketchup, a comment about the weather, a hand resting on a shoulder. What matters is not the content of the bid, but what happens next. He identifies exactly 3 ways a person can respond to a bid, and this 3-part scheme becomes the spine of everything that follows. You can turn toward the bid, reacting positively, laughing at the joke, answering the question, meeting the touch. You can turn away, ignoring or missing it, staying absorbed in your own concerns. Or you can turn against it, responding with irritation, contempt, or hostility. These sound like minor behavioral distinctions. Gottman's research shows they are anything but. The evidence he offers here is striking and specific. Drawing on his University of Washington laboratory, he reports that husbands who were headed for divorce disregarded their wives' bids for connection 82% of the time, while husbands in stable marriages turned away from those bids only 19% of the time. He found a parallel pattern in wives, and he found that happily married couples engaged one another as many as 100 times during a 10-minute dinner conversation, while couples on the path to divorce managed only 65 such moments in the same window. The difference seems trivial in any single instance, but Gottman's point is cumulative. Those extra moments of turning toward, multiplied across years, become the reservoir a couple draws on when real conflict arrives. He puts the arithmetic vividly. The additional moments of connection among the happy couples, added up over a single year, would be enough to fill a Russian novel. The laboratory itself underwrites the claim: real couples living for days in an apartment wired with cameras and body sensors, observed in the unguarded moments that ordinary research never captures. This leads him to one of the book's central metaphors: the emotional bank account. Every time a person turns toward a bid, a deposit is made. Over time, couples who consistently turn toward one another accumulate a store of goodwill, humor, and affection they can draw upon precisely when tempers flare. Gottman argues that this is why some couples can fight hard and recover quickly, while others are destroyed by the same level of conflict. The difference is not the fighting, but the reserve of positive feeling built up in the ordinary, unremarkable moments beforehand. The chapter closes by insisting that emotional connection is not a mysterious chemistry some people have and others lack. It is a skill expressed in how reliably we notice and answer the small bids of the people we love. Chapter 2. Step 1. Look at your bids for connection. Having named the bid, Gottman now turns the reader's attention inward, asking them to examine how they themselves bid and respond. The first step in his 5-step program is simply observation, becoming aware of a process that runs, for most people, entirely on autopilot. He complicates the neat 3-part scheme in useful ways. Bids, he explains, come in an infinite variety of forms and are often disguised or poorly expressed. A child's whining, an adult's sarcasm, a co-worker's complaint, these can all be camouflaged bids for connection, longing dressed up in unpleasant clothing. Gottman draws a careful distinction here. Recognizing a hostile outburst as a bid does not mean tolerating abuse, but it does mean learning to hear the need underneath the delivery, because a person who responds only to the surface irritation will miss the connection being reached for. He introduces the idea of fuzzy bidding, the habit of expressing needs so vaguely or indirectly that the other person cannot respond well even when they want to, and traces it often to homes where clear expressions of desire were discouraged. The consequences of how we respond accumulate in ways Gottman makes vivid. When bids are repeatedly turned away from or turned against, people stop bidding. He describes how the natural human response to repeated rejection is to give up reaching out, to begin, as he puts it, dodging the very person who keeps responding with contempt or indifference. This is how relationships die, not usually in a dramatic rupture, but in the slow extinction of bidding itself, as each person concludes the other will not be there for them. He also notes the long-term toll on children, whose temper tantrums and belligerence are frequently misread bids, and whose emotional development suffers when those bids go unmet. The practical thrust of the chapter is self-assessment. Gottman offers the reader tools to evaluate their own bidding patterns, how they send bids, how they receive them, whether they habitually turn toward, away, or against. The invitation is not to guilt, but to awareness. Once a person can see the pattern, they can begin to change it. And change, Gottman stresses, is possible at any point. The chapter thus sets up the entire program. Everything that follows is about understanding the forces that shape our bidding so that we can bid and respond better. Chapter 3: 6 Bid Busters and How to Avoid Them. Before building the reader up, Gottman clears the ground by naming the specific behaviors that sabotage connection. Through his observational research, he isolated 6 recurring patterns he calls bid busters, and he treats each one as a diagnosable habit with a practical remedy. The first is being mindless rather than mindful, drifting through interactions so absorbed in one's own concerns that the bids of others go unnoticed. He argues that mindlessness is rarely cruelty, it is simply inattention, but its effect is to start a cascade of criticism, defensiveness, and withdrawal that erodes the bond. The second is starting on a sour note, launching a conversation with harshness or accusation, so that the exchange is poisoned before it begins. The third is using harmful criticism instead of helpful complaint, attacking a person's character rather than naming a specific behavior and a specific need. The fourth bid buster, flooding, is where Gottman's physiological research shines. Flooding is the state of being so emotionally and physically overwhelmed during conflict, pounding heart, sweaty hands, racing defensive thoughts, that a person can no longer take in what the other is saying or respond thoughtfully. Once flooded, the body is in a kind of survival mode, and productive conversation becomes impossible. Gottman offers concrete countermeasures, including a guided relaxation exercise, sitting quietly, attending to the breath, scanning and warming the tense areas of the body, and imagining a place of safety so that the nervous system can settle enough to re-engage. The fifth bid buster is practicing a crabby habit of mind, a settled disposition of scanning for the negative, interpreting a partner's behavior in the worst possible light, and letting resentment calcify into a lens through which everything is seen. Gottman treats this not as a mood, but as a trained pattern of attention that can be retrained. He counsels deliberately countering a remembered criticism with a remembered kindness, so that the habitual scan for grievance is interrupted and rebalanced. The sixth is avoiding the conversation you need to have, letting important issues go unaddressed until the unspoken resentment quietly does its damage. Here, the remedy is the discipline of raising the matter directly and early, before it hardens. For each buster, Gottman supplies a remedy grounded in his research, and the chapter functions as a kind of field guide to self-sabotage, naming the habits precisely so the reader can catch themselves in the act. What unites all 6 is a single mechanism. Each one interrupts the flow of turning toward, whether by inattention, harshness, physiological overwhelm, a soured disposition, or silence. Diagnosing which busters one is prone to is, in Gottman's scheme, the necessary clearing of the ground before the positive skills can take hold. Chapter 4. Step 2. Discover your brain's emotional command systems. Here, the book takes its most original turn, moving from behavior to the neurological and emotional architecture that drives it. Drawing on the effective neuroscience of the researcher Jaak Panksepp, whose work on the emotional circuits of the mammalian brain Gottman credits as the basis for this section, he proposes that each of us is shaped by 7 distinct emotional command systems, inherited neural circuits that generate our basic drives and feelings. To make the science accessible, Gottman gives each system a memorable persona and illustrates them through a cast of characters arriving at a mountain cabin. There is the commander-in-chief, the system oriented toward power, control, and dominance, embodied by the character who immediately takes charge. There is the explorer, driven by curiosity, learning, and the satisfaction of seeking, who drops her bags and wants to see everything. There is the sentry, tuned to danger and vigilance, who noticed the warning about grizzly bears. There is the energy czar, responsible for rest, nourishment, and the body's fuel, who checks the food supply. There is the sensualist, coordinating touch, pleasure, and sexual connection, who wants to reconnect physically. There is the jester, oriented toward play, games, and fun, who sets up the porch swing. And there is the nest builder, focused on bonding, affiliation, and belonging, who keeps an eye on everyone's comfort. Gottman's key insight is that people differ in how strongly each system is activated, and these differences profoundly shape how they bid and what they need. A person with a highly charged explorer system will bid for novelty and adventure. A person with a strong nest builder will bid for closeness and reassurance. A sentry-dominant person will bid in ways colored by caution and threat detection. He works carefully through each system in turn, defining its optimal, overactivated, and underactivated states, because the same drive can serve or sabotage connection depending on its tuning. The explorer, when optimally engaged, produces a satisfying sense of purpose and momentum. Overactivated, it drives a person to keep chasing goals to the point of exhaustion. Underactivated, it leaves them bored and restless. The sensualist, which Gottman calls the most mysterious of the 7, organizes the whole realm of physical pleasure and sexual connection. Overactivated, it can produce a restless craving, underactivated an aversion to touch that puzzles a partner. The energy czar governs the body's needs for rest, food, and recovery, sending signals to stop and refuel. Overactivated, it can tip into obsession with sleep or diet. Underactivated, into a reckless neglect of the body's limits. The sentry, tuned to threat, keeps us safe when it fires appropriately, but breeds chronic anxiety when it fires too readily. The commander-in-chief seeks power and control. The jester coordinates play and entertainment. And the nest builder, which Gottman ties closely to the whole project of the book, organizes bonding, friendship, and affiliation. Mismatches between partners' dominant systems, Gottman argues, are a hidden source of conflict. 2 people may love each other deeply, yet keep missing one another's bids because their brains are tuned to different emotional frequencies. One bidding constantly for adventure, while the other bids for security, each experiencing the other's bids as faintly wrong. The remedy is not to change one's wiring, but to understand it, in oneself and in others, so that bids can be recognized for what they are and met on their own terms. The chapter gives the reader assessments to map their own command system profile and those of the people they are closest to. Chapter 5. Step 3. Examine your emotional heritage. Gottman next turns to the past, arguing that the way we handle emotion today was largely learned in the home we grew up in. Every family, he says, has its own culture and its own philosophy of emotion, a set of collective, often unspoken beliefs about what feelings mean and how they should be handled. Understanding one's own inherited philosophy is the 3rd step toward better connection. He identifies distinct family philosophies of emotion, drawing on the meta-emotion research that also underlies his work on parenting. In emotion coaching, families, feelings, including negative ones, are treated as opportunities for intimacy and teaching. Children are helped to name and navigate their emotions, and they grow up comfortable with the emotional lives of themselves and others. In emotion-dismissing families, feelings, especially painful ones, are minimized, distracted from, or waved away as unimportant. Members raised this way may struggle to recognize and articulate emotion, their own and other people's. Gottman also describes a laissez-faire philosophy in which emotions are accepted but never guided, so that a child receives permission to feel but no help in managing what they feel. He notes that people adopt a dismissing stance for many reasons, often because they were raised that way themselves or because emotion frightened the adults around them. And he treats these inheritances with compassion rather than blame. Gottman grounds this in the concept of meta-emotion, literally our feelings about feelings, which he had developed in earlier research. Each family transmits not just rules about behavior, but an entire stance toward the emotional life itself. Whether anger is dangerous or acceptable, whether sadness should be comforted or ignored, whether fear is to be soothed or shamed. He supplies the reader with an assessment that sorts their answers toward either a dismissing or a coaching philosophy, making the invisible inheritance visible and nameable. A parent operating from a coaching philosophy, he notes, sees a child's difficult emotion as a moment to turn toward and teach. A dismissing parent sees the same moment as something to shut down or distract away from. The stakes, again, are concrete. Gottman argues that a person raised in an emotion-dismissing home is not as equipped to turn toward the bids of others because they have less practice noticing and honoring feeling in the first place. Children from such homes, his research suggests, are less capable than others at reading and managing emotion. The habits run deep and operate invisibly, which is why he insists on excavating them. He also revisits the way old wounds distort present relationships, how a spillover of self-criticism, rooted in the distant past, can lead someone to hear an innocent bid as an attack, so that a person ends up defending against a threat that exists only in the residue of memory. The chapter's practical work is a set of exercises for reconstructing one's family philosophy of emotion and seeing how it shapes present-day bidding. The point is liberating. An inheritance, once seen clearly, can be revised. We are shaped by our emotional heritage, but not sentenced to repeat it. Chapter 6. Step 4. Sharpen your emotional communication skills. With the inner architecture and the inherited habits laid bare, Gottman turns to the teachable craft of emotional communication. This is the most skills-focused chapter, and it rests on a claim that emotional communication can genuinely be improved through deliberate practice, the way any craft can. A central skill he develops is the reading of emotion through nonverbal cues, especially facial expression. Drawing carefully on the research tradition of studying the face, while distancing himself explicitly from the discredited pseudoscience of physiognomy, Gottman teaches the reader to attend to the fleeting, often involuntary expressions that reveal what a person is truly feeling. He notes that the most meaningful facial expressions happen fast, sometimes lasting only a fraction of a second, and that learning to catch them, along with tone of voice and body language, dramatically improves one's ability to detect the emotion behind a bid. The point is attunement. To respond well to a bid, you first have to perceive it accurately, and much of that information is carried non-verbally. He pairs the skill of reading emotion with the skill of expressing it, and the skill of showing genuine interest in another's inner life. Here he emphasizes asking open-ended questions, the kind that cannot be answered with a single word, in ways that communicate sincere curiosity rather than interrogation. He contrasts the vague, closed question, "How was your day?" that invites a one-word deflection with the patient, interested inquiry that draws a person out and signals that their experience genuinely matters to the asker. The distinction, he shows, is not merely grammatical. The same information can be requested in a way that opens a person up or shuts them down, and skilled communicators learn to phrase their interest so that it becomes an invitation rather than a formality. Gottman is candid about how demanding this is. Skilled observation, he stresses, takes vigilance and time. It is not passive, but an active, attentive practice that most people never consciously develop. He gives the reader structured exercises for building it, practicing the reading of facial expression, rehearsing the asking of drawing out questions, learning to name and share one's own emotions clearly, rather than expecting others to guess. Throughout, he keeps returning to the same underlying move, the deliberate choice to turn toward, now equipped with the perceptual and expressive tools to do it well. The chapter effectively arms the reader. Having diagnosed the obstacles and mapped the inner terrain, it hands over the concrete techniques for connection. Chapter 7, Step 5, Find Shared Meaning. The final step lifts the argument from the mechanics of individual bids to the larger question of what a relationship is ultimately for. Gottman argues that the deepest and most durable relationships are those in which people build shared meaning, a common sense of purpose, identity, and significance that turns a series of interactions into a shared life. He describes several avenues toward this shared meaning. One is the development of shared goals and a shared vision. The couple or family or team that finds common purpose in what they are building together. Another is the exploration of one another's dreams and visions, taking seriously the aspirations and longings each person carries, and supporting one another in the pursuit of them, rather than treating them as threats or distractions. A third, which Gottman emphasizes with particular warmth, is the creation of rituals of connection. The recurring, intentional moments a relationship returns to again and again. The morning coffee, the Sunday dinner, the way a couple reunites at the end of a day. These rituals, he argues, are how the abstract idea of shared meaning is made concrete and sustained. They are bids formalized into habit, connection built into the structure of a shared life. Gottman is precise about how rituals do their work. A ritual of connection is any repeated, structured moment that a relationship reliably returns to and invests with emotional significance. And its power lies precisely in its dependability. Because the moment is guaranteed to recur, both people can count on it. It removes the guesswork from connection and builds turning toward into the architecture of daily life, rather than leaving it to chance. He distinguishes these intentional rituals from mere routine. What makes a shared meal or a nightly reunion a ritual rather than a habit is the meaning deliberately poured into it. He also stresses that supporting one another's dreams requires genuine curiosity about what those dreams actually are. That many partners have never truly asked one another what they most long for, and that the exploration itself deepens the bond regardless of whether the dreams are ever fully realized. Shared meaning, in Gottman's account, provides the common emotional ground that makes everything else more resilient. When people understand what they are building together and why it matters, they extend one another more goodwill, forgive more readily, and turn toward one another more reliably, even under strain. This is the incentive, he argues, that keeps people investing in the small moments, even when it would be easier not to. The chapter completes the arc from the smallest unit, the 3-second bid, to the largest structure, a life woven together by purpose and ritual, in which the countless small acts of turning toward finally add up to something a person can call home. Chapter 8. Apply what you've learned. The penultimate chapter is the book's workshop, applying the entire 5-step program to the specific relationships that fill a life: marriage, parenthood, friendship, adult sibling relationships, and relationships with co-workers. Gottman's method here is systematic. For each type of relationship, he walks the reader through all 5 steps in turn, looking at bids, discovering the relevant emotional command systems, examining emotional heritage, sharpening communication skills, and finding shared meaning, tailoring each to the particular texture of that bond. The application to marriage is the fullest, but Gottman is careful to show how the same 5-step sequence reshapes each other kind of bond. In parenthood, he emphasizes that a child's bids are often awkward or disguised, the whine, the tantrum, the sassiness, and that the parent's task is to look past the delivery to the reaching out underneath. He shows how vague questions, "How was school?" predictably fail, and how specific, curious ones, "Who did you sit with at lunch?" draw a child out. In friendship, he applies the same steps to bonds that have quietly gone dormant, showing how friends drift not through any rupture but through the slow cessation of bidding, and how deliberate turning toward can revive them. With adult siblings, he confronts the peculiar weight of shared childhood, the way old rivalries and inherited family scripts distort present bids between grown brothers and sisters. and applies the emotional heritage step directly to that history. And in co-worker relationships, he adapts the framework to the workplace, showing that colleagues too bid for connection and respond by turning toward, away, or against, that attending to a co-worker's dominant command system eases collaboration, and that even a team can build a form of shared meaning around common purpose. The consistent message is that the framework is universal. Wherever human beings seek connection, the same small unit is at work, and the same 5 skills apply. The chapter turns theory into a set of concrete, relationship-specific practices the reader can begin using immediately. Chapter 9. In conclusion, Gottman closes by returning to the simple, powerful idea at the heart of the book. A fundamental discovery has emerged from his research, he says. The elementary constituents of closeness between people are these mundane, everyday moments of emotional communication and the responses they receive. Those moments are undramatic and easily overlooked, and that is usually their fate. Yet they are the very substance of intimacy. By becoming mindful of them, he argues, we can give and receive the support we all need from our closest relationships. Integrating the small moments of the bid with the deeper knowledge of the brain's emotional command systems, he suggests, allows us to see what may be missing in our lives and to understand the mismatches between our needs and the needs of the people we love. The book ends not with a flourish, but with an invitation to attention. Taken as a whole, the relationship cure performs a quiet act of recovery. In an age that keeps promising that connection can be engineered through the right technique or the right partner, Gottman insists that love is made and remade in the smallest moments. The glance answered, the bid received, the ordinary attention turned toward another person rather than away. That is not a mechanical claim, whatever the laboratory sensors might suggest. It points toward something the human heart has always known, that we are made for one another, that a person becomes most fully himself, not in isolation, but in communion, and that the daily labor of turning toward another soul is among the most consequential things we ever do. The book's science confirms what a wiser tradition never doubted, that attentiveness to the person in front of us is not a soft skill, but the very structure of a good life. There is a hard-won hope in this. Because bidding and responding are learnable, no one is condemned by temperament or upbringing to a life of missed connection. The emotional heritage that shaped us can be examined and revised, and the skills of turning toward can be practiced at any age. What Gottman offers, finally, is a discipline of love disguised as a set of research findings, the summons to notice, to attend, and to answer the quiet reaching out of the people we are given to love. It is well worth reading in full. Few books make the ordinary moments of a life feel so charged with meaning, or so clearly within our power to redeem.